Have you noticed that everything seems to be getting more expensive? Filling up your gas tank costs more. Groceries are eating up a bigger share of your paycheck. Airline tickets are becoming harder to afford. And the frightening part is that all of this may be linked to a war taking place thousands of miles away. But here's the shocking reality. In just a matter of months, the Iran conflict has pushed US. Gasoline prices up by more than 50%, triggered the fastest inflation surge in 3 years, and sent shockwaves through the global economy. What happens if the conflict escalates even further? Oil could soar above $120 per barrel. Essential goods could become significantly more expensive. And in the end, ordinary people will pay the price. Watch until the end, because the numbers you're about to see reveal how this conflict is quietly taking money out of your pocket. If you think rising prices are getting out of control, hit the like button. Leave a comment about which country you believe will be hit the hardest, and share this video so more people understand what's really happening. When most people think about war, they picture missiles, tanks, and military operations. But in today's interconnected world, war creates another weapon just as dangerous: inflation. And that's exactly what is happening as a result of the Iran conflict. According to the latest economic data, US inflation accelerated in April at its fastest pace in 3 years. The primary reason wasn't a booming economy or excessive consumer demand. Instead, it was an energy shock triggered by the conflict. Gasoline prices in the United States have risen by more than 50% in a relatively short period. At first glance, that may sound like a problem only for drivers. In reality, it affects nearly everything. The bread you buy at the supermarket is transported by trucks. The smartphone in your pocket depends on materials shipped across oceans. Every commercial flight relies on jet fuel. When energy becomes more expensive, the entire global supply chain begins to shake. This is the economic domino effect that experts fear most. Oil is not just fuel. It is one of the foundations of the modern economy. Plastics, chemicals, fertilizers, food packaging, transportation, and manufacturing all depend directly or indirectly on oil. That is why the impact of the Iran conflict extends far beyond the Middle East. At the center of the crisis is the Strait of Hormuz. This strategic waterway handles roughly 1/5 of the world's traded oil supply. As military tensions increased and shipping risks grew, global energy markets reacted immediately. Traders began pricing in the possibility of tighter oil supplies. Brent crude oil briefly surged to around $118 per barrel before easing back to the low $90 following signs of ceasefire negotiations. Nevertheless, prices remained significantly higher than they were before the conflict began. That means inflationary pressure has not disappeared. Across Europe, the effects are becoming increasingly visible. The Eurozone is facing slowing economic growth while prices continue to rise. Economists call this scenario stagflation. In simple terms, it means weak economic growth combined with high inflation. It is one of the most challenging situations for central banks. If they raise interest rates to fight inflation, economic growth may weaken further. If they avoid raising rates, inflation could continue climbing. In the United Kingdom, the impact has already appeared in household energy bills. Energy regulator Ofgem has increased its cap on electricity and natural gas prices by 13%. As a result, millions of households are expected to pay more for heating and electricity. Meanwhile, Britain's housing market is beginning to feel the pressure. Home prices have recorded their largest monthly decline in nearly a year. Higher interest rates and rising borrowing costs are making homes less affordable for many buyers. But war does not create only losers. It also creates winners. One of the biggest beneficiaries has been Russia. Thanks to higher energy prices, Russian oil and gas revenues in May were projected to increase by nearly 39% compared with the same period last year. For a country heavily dependent on energy exports, elevated oil prices function like a massive financial windfall. Meanwhile, airlines have emerged as some of the biggest victims. Global businesses have already absorbed more than $25 billion in additional costs related to the conflict. The airline industry alone accounts for approximately $15 billion of that figure due to soaring fuel expenses. This helps explain why airfares are under pressure to rise across many regions of the world. And airlines are not alone. Chemical manufacturers, automobile producers, consumer goods companies, and transportation firms are all facing higher operating costs. When business costs rise, companies generally have only two choices: accept lower profits or pass those costs on to consumers. Most choose the second option. That is why ordinary people feel the effects of war every time they reach the checkout counter. Another important development is unfolding across Asia. Many companies are stockpiling raw materials and inventory. They fear that critical trade routes could face further disruptions if the conflict continues. While stockpiling helps reduce supply risks, it also increases short-term demand, pushing prices even higher. China, the world's largest oil importer, is also experiencing the impact. Its seaborne crude oil imports have fallen to their lowest level in nearly a decade. The reason is not lower demand. Rather, it is a combination of supply disruptions and elevated prices. This demonstrates just how far-reaching the current energy crisis has become. Even financial markets are reacting sharply. Whenever reports of potential ceasefire agreements emerge, oil prices tend to fall and stock markets rally. Whenever tensions escalate, oil prices rise and inflation fears return. Investors now find themselves trapped between two very different futures. The first scenario is peace. If the United States and Iran reach a lasting agreement, shipping through the Strait of Hormuz could normalize. Energy supplies would improve. Oil prices could decline. Inflationary pressure would gradually ease. The second scenario is a prolonged conflict. If military operations intensify or shipping routes face severe disruptions, oil prices could surge once again. Some financial institutions have warned that crude oil could climb toward $120 per barrel under a worst-case scenario. At that point, the consequences would extend far beyond gasoline prices. Transportation costs, food prices, consumer services could all become more expensive. Perhaps the greatest concern is that consumers are running out of financial resilience. In the United States, household savings rates have fallen to around 2.6%. That means many families have limited financial buffers to absorb another major price shock. If the conflict drags on, pressure on household budgets will only increase. Ultimately, this is the most important lesson. A conflict in the Middle East is no longer a distant event. In today's globalized economy, it can directly affect the cost of filling your car, paying your electricity bill, buying groceries, and managing your household finances. That is why investors, corporations, and governments around the world are watching every development in the Iran conflict so closely. Because the future path of global inflation may depend on what happens in one of the world's most strategically important geopolitical hotspots. Thank you for following this story. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it. For now, this is goodbye. Thank you for staying with Societale Stories.